Welcome to Chad's Silversmithing. Today I wanted to talk a little bit about a basic project that's a great way for beginners to get started. It covers the basics of using some of the tools you have to learn how to use and become familiar with. It covers a simple solder joint and how to use solder. It deals with pickle and how to clean a project up before you polish it, and then of course it has polishing. So it's a great, not intimidating way for someone who's never done this before to get a grasp on the basics of it. So, all right, let's get started. I have a couple of examples here to show you what we're doing. These are two little simple silver bands. This one's 6 gauge half round, this one's 8 gauge half round. And when I use terms like half round or gauge, if you have questions about that, feel free to leave questions in the comment section and maybe I can address them in a future video, or I could just directly answer them in the comments. But either way, I'd like to hear your input about stuff like that. Here's some examples of some of the pattern wires. I don't know if you can see the actual patterns on them, but they come with a pre-impressed pattern on them in wire form, and then you can just solder them together. So we'll need some of those wire stocks, which I have over here. The tools you'll need, I use my wide nose pliers, the flat nose ones, and my needle nose pliers pretty frequently during this project. Making a ring, so you'll need a ring mandrel like this. Okay. I use a plastic headed hammer because it doesn't ding up the metal, and it's got a little more oomph than a rawhide mallet that a lot of people use. Cutters, I use these flush cutters that leave a relatively flat side on this side when you cut with them. For sheet or for the solder that I use, which is sheet solder, I use just these little shears. They're Fisker's shears, which are generally in most hobby stores. Pair of cross-lock insulated tweezers. These are primarily for picking up solder and putting it where it needs to go. And then a single cut bastard file, which you can get locally for $5-6 usually. So those are the tools. And to get started, a lot of times people first will figure out what size ring they need with this, or size someone else's finger. The thing to remember is this piece and this tool were made by separate companies, and the quality control is not necessarily that great on them anyway. And so let's say this one says 7.5 here. Sometimes you put it on here and it's significantly off from where you had thought it was going to be. This one actually comes pretty close to 7 3/4. And all that really matters though is that if this is the one that fits the finger and it lands on 7 3/4, that's where we need to measure on the ring mandrel. So that's where I'll remember for. So you could just take the wire and wrap it around, but it's really hard to get it tight around there so you get a real accurate fit. The easiest way is to use a little strip of scratch paper, which I cut a minute ago. I try to cut them about the same width as the wire, or pretty close. And then I'm going to wrap this right around the spot where that fell. So 7 3/4 was what we decided on. Okay. And when they cross over here, you try to get them as tight as you can. They meet right here, but because I'm going to have to file the end a little bit, and because this is a two-dimensional basically object and we're creating something in 3 dimensions, it's going to have a little difference from this. If you leave a little bit extra beyond where they meet, I usually make it about 1/8 of an inch there. This is the side from here around to the other side will be the side that's the length of the ring, and that extra 1/8 of an inch will help compensate for that filing and that geometry change that happens when you solder them together. Okay? So now we got that, and all we need to do is pick our wire. And I have a number of pattern wires over here. See various different kinds. I don't know if you can see these or not, but I'm going to randomly pick one here. I kind of like the snake skinny looking one right here. Let's see, we got that. And I need some half round 8 gauge half round, which I use it for a lot of bands, and people seem to like that size. It's kind of narrow, but sort of wedding ring-ish. Typically there's a cut mark left from the previous user who left the beveled cut that the other side of these cutters leave, and so I typically save myself a little filing and just snip that end off with the flat side, so it's pretty flat there. Then in order to get the piece of wire that's the right length, since I was going for, I think I said a 7 3/4, I'm going to lay this right up so that you can get it right up against there, and I hope you can see this. If not, I'll have to reshoot this, but now I'm going to cut it right where the bottom comes, again with the flat side facing the piece of wire that's going to be my ring eventually. Okay, so I'm going to do that for the pattern wire too. I'll just make them both the same size for the purpose of this video. Snip that off there. Okay, and we're going to do exactly the same thing that I did before right here. I'm just going to put it right there, line it up, and then I'm going to snip that guy right off there on the bottom. Okay, all right. Next comes everybody's favorite part, which is to file the ends flat. So one of the things some people do is they go ahead and make the rings from the start in a circle, and when you do that, you have to get the angle of where they come together on the end just right, and that's kind of hard if it's not a 90-degree angle, which it wouldn't be if you're doing a round ring. So I tend to make the rings in kind of a D shape, and the two ends come together straight onto each other, and so all we have to do is file a 90-degree angle on each end, and then we can line them up perfectly and get a nice solder joint. So that'll be the next stage, is filing. So I use the bastard file, and we're just going to get those ends flat. Okay. At this point, what I usually do is I take the ring mandrel and I put the band on the opposite side of the mandrel towards me, and I just pull it into kind of a U shape like this. I'm going to do that on both of these guys. Okay, so now I got two U shapes, and notice it's not perfect. It doesn't have to be perfect, but our next step is going to be getting these two ends to line up with each other. And some people use nylon headed pliers, but I'm going to be polishing the insides of the ring anyway, so I'm not going to, and I'm experienced enough now to where I don't ding it up too badly. But if you want to use nylon pliers, that works great too. So I'm going to get these two, I'm going to bend it. So one is going, hope you can see that like that. And then I'm going to take the other side and I'm going to bend it down too. And one of the things with silver is that if you just line them up like this, where it's got a gap in it, every time you go to push it together like this, it's going to spring back a little bit. And one of the problems with solder is that it won't fill in empty spaces like that. So when we go to solder that joint, you're going to have a lot of trouble getting that to stay closed. So we can use one of the properties that silver has to actually help us in this situation. Silver, like most metals, when you work it back and forth or when you pound on it, it gets work hardened. It gets springier and harder. Okay, and so instead of having the springiness, which right now is working against us, pushing it out, we're going to put one of these guys underneath the other one like that, and I'm going to grab the side of it and I'm going to push it way past where they meet and pull it back again almost to where they come together. I don't want to pull it all the way out because it kind of pulls part of the spring out that we're creating. Do that a couple of times, and then you'll start to feel this bottom part is getting to have, right here, the bottom of it, it's getting to have a little bit of springiness. So when I pull it back this last time, I hope you can see this, I'm just going to let that guy, oops, pop into place like that. So, and then it's not lined up right now. All I really got to do is spend a little time getting these guys lined up a little better, as long as I don't pull them back apart. So now when I pull on these guys, they're pushing together pretty hard. So even if the metal relaxes under the heat, which it does sometimes, it won't pull apart and leave a gap for you. So that's a trick to getting that taken care of. All right. So I'm going to do that on the other one too. This is the pattern one I'm doing now. Doing exactly the same thing here, just pushing it past like that a few times, letting it pop into place, and just lining it up a little bit. Okay, so the funny thing about these pattern wires too is more often than not they have a pretty close repeating pattern, so you don't have to spend a lot of time trying to get the pattern to line up most of the time. Oftentimes it'll be really hard to find where the solder joint is anyway. Okay? But so the thing we have to do different between these two, the round or the half round one that's plain on the outside has no pattern, so you don't have to worry about any excess solder running into the outside of the thing and screwing up the pattern and making it look funny. With this one though, you would have that issue because there'll be kind of a clumpy glob out there that kind of merges with the pattern there, and so everybody will know where your solder joint is, and that would be shameful, wouldn't it? What you want to do with these ones is we're going to solder it from the inside instead to prevent some of that coming through. So I'll do the plain one first because those are super easy, and I'm going to grab some of my hard sheet solder, which is the kind that I use primarily, and I'm going to cut myself kind of a long skinny strip here. Okay. Hopefully you can see this guy here. It's probably a little more than 3/16 of an inch long. It doesn't have to be quite that long. In fact, I might not like it quite that long. By maybe 1/8 of an inch wide. And one of the cool things about these chain nose or needle nose pliers that everybody uses for metalsmithing is that they're kind of half round shaped. And so if I put the long skinny strip of solder in there and I just kind of roll it around the outside of that, it creates, I don't know if you can see this or not, but it, let me get this lined up. It creates kind of a little, I'm not used to doing this with a camera. You can see it's kind of a little half round shape then. Alright, so that'll fit right over our solder joint there. Let me make sure that you can see what's going on here. I think it should be. A little bit there. Okay, so first things first, we're gonna, whoopsie, I'm gonna grab my flux bottle, make sure it's going. I use a liquid spray-on flux. Many people use paint-on flux or paste solder flux combo. So I got a brand new bottle here. Let's see if it works or not. I know this one works. There we go. Okay. So first off, grab myself a torch. For these, my beginners, I usually have them use these propane torches. They're basically plumber's torches, but they're not too terribly intimidating for beginners. You can get plenty of heat out of them to do what we're going to do today, and they're a good starting point, although the limitations are mostly having to do with the size of piece you can do with these guys. Okay, so when you're fluxing something, you want to make sure that the spot where you're going to solder gets really nice and crusty. Now the rest of it on this case doesn't really matter, and I know a lot of people who do this use the flux to control where the solder flows, but in this case it doesn't matter too much, so I'm not going to worry too much about that, and spray-on works just fine. For this little piece of solder now that I have the flux on there and crusty and dry, which is important, you want it to be crusty. If you have trouble getting solder to flow, check to see if you've fluxed it well enough. Sometimes that causes that problem. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and drop that guy on there. And then I still have my torch going here, so I'm going to make sure the heat is going well here. Alright. And then when I'm heating this, the only thing that usually can go wrong is if I get one side of the end of the ring It's basically like a one long wire with two ends that are separated from each other, even though they're sitting next to each other, kind of. Because silver loses heat really fast. So if I'm heating over here, it's losing heat over here. If I'm heating over here, it's losing heat over here. So ideally, you want this side and this side to both reach the soldering temperature, which in this case is about 1450 degrees Fahrenheit. We want them to both reach that temperature about the same time so that the solder just melts in place and sticks to both sides. If you hit one side at its temperature before the other side, the solder will have a tendency to jump over the side that has reached the soldering temperature and not stick to the other side. So ideally we're going to go pretty fast in kind of a U shape like this, or upside down U for me. And I'm watching the solder. When the metal gets hot enough, the solder will start to get kind of crinkly and start to melt a little on the corners, like right there. And now it's starting to flow completely. And to make sure it flows completely, I'm going to focus right at the end, just on the solder, to bump it up a few more degrees to really get it to flow completely. Okay? And that's all you got to do to solder that kind. Okay, now, while this is still hot, I use cold pickle, so I'm going to toss this in the pickle while it's still warm, and it tends to clean up faster. Okay, for the pattern wire, I'm going to use a third hand, and this is one of those tools that I don't use if I can avoid using it, because it soaks up a lot of heat when you're heating stuff, and it makes it take longer for things to get up to the soldering temperature, and that is sometimes irritating, and it's frustrating for beginners, especially because they can't figure out why they can't get their piece up to temperature. And it's because the third hand is soaking up tons of heat. So I'm going to cut myself this time a few squares of solder, kind of in the size range of 1/8 of an inch by 1/8 of an inch, or somewhere thereabouts. And this time I'm going to flux on the inside, and then I'm going to dry the flux, and then I'm going to put a little piece of solder on the inside. And when I heat it, I'm going to heat it pretty much the same way, although we're going vertically now. But the problem that can happen with this, solder tends to go wherever the heat is hottest, and so when it does start to flow, it'll puddle on the inside, but it may not want to penetrate that crack that goes through the thing there. So in order to get it to pull through that crack, we want to pull the heat around while that solder is still liquid and get some heat going underneath it so that it kind of draws down into the crack like that. That's ideally what we want to do, but not so much that it spreads out on the surface on the outside. So so let's go ahead and do that and see how it works. All right. So let's spray a little flux on here. For me, the hardest part about doing this is balancing the piece of solder on the inside. Some wires you could probably set upright on the pad and do this, but I kind of started doing this way a long time ago, so I got used to doing it this way. That's not to say there aren't many ways to do these kinds of things. One of the things I'm always happy to find is that everybody has kind of their own way of doing stuff, and that makes me happy, because I learn new stuff from people all the time that I never even thought of, and that's great. Okay, so on this one we're going to heat it pretty much the same way. The torch is getting a little crazy on me here. I'm going to go, if I've been upside down U like this, and remember what I said, when it does flow, I'm going to make sure the solder is flowing completely. Nice puddle, and then I'm going to kind of roll the heat around underneath like that in order to get it to pull through there. Okay, so, and then when I look out here, I probably got a little more than I wanted to come through here, but you should see a shiny line or some shininess. If you see a black line, that means that the solder did not penetrate all the way through the crack. The good thing is, if you did it and it flowed on the backside, as long as you set it down here like this, the solder is already attached to it. So all you got to do is heat it up to the point where it starts to flow again, and then point the heat towards the solder joint there from the outside, and it should draw it through. Okay? Alright, so next we'll pickle this for a while, and then we'll come back and we will, once they're cleaned up, we'll polish them. Alright, let those pickle for a while. And so our next step is going to be to clean up the inside. I forgot to mention one type of file that you need for this project, and that's a half-round jeweler's file. There's typically a little bit of solder on the inside left over from our solder joint. So You have to remove that before we round it out on the mandrel. I'm going to do that on both of these guys. The plain one has quite a bit of excess, so it may take a second here for me to get this done. Next, I typically set this on my knee when I do this to give it a little cushion, but for the sake of seeing what we're doing here, I'm going to do it kind of in front of the camera. I'm going to hold my fingers on either side of the high points we created with that kind of D-shape ring that we had left over after soldering it. So I'm going to put my fingers on either side of that and lightly tap the high points, and generally it slides down the mandrel. And once you get it mostly down, you can set it down on your knee fully and grab the top of the mandrel and tap it pretty nicely like that. Okay, and I was shooting for 7 3/4, and usually you get within a quarter size of where you're shooting for. It's always easiest when it's a little small, if it comes out a little small, because you can stretch it downwards by tapping like that. If I hit it right on the nose on that one. Okay, same thing on this one here. We're going to plain one, tap those. Okay, and once you have it mostly rounded, you can set it on your knee. I don't always hit the sides right on the nose. I did this time for some reason, but usually pretty close. Okay, so once you have it rounded out, on the plain one, there's typically a little excess solder, so I use the bastard file to remove that. After I do this, typically the next step would be to use the Dremel on the inside of the ring. Some people use special fittings that attach to their polishing wheel to do the insides of rings, but I prefer to use a Dremel. I'll do another video on that at some point. So I'm just going to do this. I'll do that on my own without filming, and then we'll get to the polishing stage. So. Okay, I hope I'm in frame here. I'm not 100% sure I am, but we're going to do our best. So, did the inside on the Dremel, like I said, and I wanted to talk before I did this on how I do this. With bands, I always start out on the outside edge, and normally I'd be wearing gloves while I'm doing this, and you'll see that in a minute. But when I'm polishing the outside edge, I push with quite a bit of pressure into the wheel here while I'm polishing. Flip it over, work my way all the way around on the other side too, and then the final part is I hold it like this between my fingers, and I grind it in there pretty hard and rotate it, grind it, rotate it, grind it, rotate it, grind it, and you'll see how quickly it gets pretty shiny. On the pattern wire, the only thing that I do different is the wheel is pretty aggressive on polishing stuff, so you got to be a little cautious about polishing the pattern right off. So same way, but when you do this, do a light buff around the outside once, flip it over to face the other direction, and do a light buff around it that way too. And then, as always, do a quick once over with the ZAM on the final polishing wheel. Okay, then we'll be done. Get to pull my hair back. Safety first. See those. It's a pretty good shine on them. That Zam really does a nice job for the final polish. Alright, well thanks for watching my video. I hope you found the things that I showed you today entertaining as well as useful. And if you did so, please feel free to share it with others. I'd love it if you would hit the like button, and I'd even love it more if you'd subscribe to my channel. Thanks again, and happy silversmithing.